Hello, and thanks for reviewing the following presentation given during the 2020 Data Science Symposium webinar series. The Data Science Symposium is one of several services provided by the University of Cincinnati's Center for Business Analytics, a part of the Lindner College of Business. Through leadership forums, student projects, public education events, including the Data Science Symposium and the Analytics Summit this spring, as well as professional development courses, the Center provides businesses and organizations with game-changing capabilities to drive analytics for competitive advantage, regardless of size or type of organization you represent. For more information about the Center, including how to join our 25 member organizations and the benefits they enjoy, please contact either myself or Dr. Michael Fry here at UC. Now, enjoy the following presentation. First up is Radhika Kulkarni. Hi, Radhika.
Hi, Glenn. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Yeah, good evening.
Good evening.
Too.
Yes.
Yeah, very well. Oh, good. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you.
Excellent. Radhika recently retired as the Vice President of Advanced Analytics R&D at SAS Institute, and she was responsible for analytics software products portfolio. So all of their analytics software was under Radhika. She holds a Ph.D. in operations research from Cornell, and under her leadership, OR gained recognition as a key contributor to scalability and performance of algorithms in statistics, machine learning, forecasting, data mining, econometrics, and other areas. She serves on many academic advisory boards, and she is an Informs Fellow and a Worms Award winner. And she is, I say worms, I meant worms, isn't that correct? I mispronounced that, I apologize. And you can tell us what worms is all about, so there's no confusion about that. She's recently been chosen as the president-elect of Informs, which is a 12,000 plus member organization dedicated to operations research and advanced analytics, or what some would also call prescriptive analytics, and others would also call the promised land, where all real analytics wants to eventually get to. But with that, Radhika, you're going to talk about what makes for a great analytics organization and also how to be a successful contributor to that organization. Correct?
Yes, definitely. Glenn, thank you for that introduction. And thanks also to the University of Cincinnati and for this invitation. I've always held your program in a great respect. And so it's a big honor for me to be able to speak to the students, the faculty, as well as the other members of the audience today. After about 35 years at SAS and a couple of years before that teaching at USC in OR and statistics, I guess I've spent a little bit of time with analytics. And so I'm really happy to share what I have learned. It happens, it's a lifelong learning experience. You continue to learn throughout your career. And so I hope in the next half an hour or so, I'll be able to share some of the insights and what makes you a good analytics leader and some of the tips I can share with you as to things one has to learn when you get into the real world.
Excellent. Well, we're certainly all looking forward to it. And with that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you, and I'm going to turn my video off and let you have at it.
Okay, so thanks very much, Glenn. And I'm going to share my video presentation, and I hope all of you can see this. So as Glenn mentioned, I want to share some of my experience that I've gained, both as a leader as well as starting as an analytical professional. So this is indeed a golden age for data science and analytics. And to set the stage for some of the points I would like to make on the two sides of being a part of an analytical organization, I'd like to set the stage with some points that I will make with regard to why is this a golden age, as well as what are some of the challenges, what are the opportunities for innovation. And that will help me give you some more concrete examples of what are the characteristics of an analytics project and what makes you a good, successful leader of an analytics team. And finally, I'll end with some tips about how you can start being an analytics professional and what you need to succeed. So big data used to be a new buzzword a few years ago, but now everybody is familiar with it. You see that in all kinds of fields, in every business, and what makes the challenge really difficult is the fact that the data from all these sources come in different forms. They're not all rectangular, they're not all like a time series. And here are some examples of what kinds of data are used for answering what kinds of problems or questions. For example, if you want to know who will respond to a particular campaign, you need to collect data about each individual customer that you may already have and what's their behavior, what sort of programs do they like, what sort of offers do they accept, etc., etc. And based on that, you build your predictive model. If you want to know what your future sales are going to be, what the future can predict with regard to the stock market, which is very, very difficult, I agree. But other things like where this is the peak of the COVID crisis going to happen next, and what happens with the cases, the deaths, etc. So there you're looking at the trend and what's been happening, and you want to look at what will the future demand look like, what will the future behavior look like. For that, you're looking at time series data. And now if you're trying to follow a population through time, like what is the entire demographics doing over time, you need both the demographic data at every point in time, but also how things change over time. So we call that panel data. Then if you're looking at just some bar charts and graphs and line charts, then you can check what are the anomalies. So like if you're looking at the quality control of a manufacturing process. And similar to that, every one of these are different types of data sources. Who are the influencers? You might want to look at the network data. Who is the person with the most number of friends? So maybe marketing something to them will make sure that your campaign is successful. What item should I recommend next? Like Netflix and Amazon, they all try to predict what kind of things you would like to buy next. And then Twitter data or social media data for the text analytics, where, how is the product perceived, audio data, video data, etc. You get the idea. Every data source is specific to certain types of problems, and some problems actually require data from different kinds of sources. And each data source and the question you're trying to answer requires a different modeling tool. So when you're trying to look at predictive models, you need some data mining, statistical modeling techniques. You need some forecasting techniques when you're doing prediction for the future, what's happening. And you need some text analytics. You need data mining for doing more complex machine learning algorithms and so on. So in order to understand the data source and answer the different questions, you need to have specific modeling tools. So where I'm going with this point is that in order to be able to learn all these modeling tools, you have different disciplines that come up across each of those. And those are all the disciplines that form what we know as analytics and data science, what we refer to as optimization, data mining, statistics, forecasting, etc., and all under the big umbrella of analytics, data science, etc. So, and each, like I mentioned earlier, each problem might, if you're lucky enough, it might be one type of data source and one type of analytical tool that you need. But more often, the more complex problems really require a wealth of tools that come from different forecasting, quality improvement, optimization. All these techniques need to come together. So each technology works well on its own, but if you actually bring them all together, that's what you need to build a business solution. Like for instance, in a retail optimization suite, where you're trying to figure out what's the prediction, what is the forecast, what is the the sales going to look like in the fall, next spring, etc., you need to have some forecasting experience. You need to be able to figure out who to market to if you're trying to attract customers to your store. There you need some predictive modeling or machine learning. Then if you're trying to figure out what is the best time to make what kind of offer, when do you put things on clearance, and so on and so forth, you need optimization techniques. And underneath all of that is the data management, which is super, super critical for any of these problems. Being able to access the data, store the data, manipulate the data, and actually apply these algorithms. So these are some of the overall picture that you need to have an idea before you even get into the analytics practical sense, right? So the other thing that is also very key these days, especially when you talk about artificial intelligence and many of the machine learning techniques, what is it that's driving the need for us to invent newer and newer techniques? Why is this big hype about artificial intelligence? It's nothing but high scale, highly performant, very scalable, automated data-driven decision making. So you need to be able to do things automatically. If you have to build predictive models for all the different counties in your country or in your state, all the different states in your country, especially for things like, you know, right now for the COVID cases and what's happening with the deaths, etc., or any of the sales that you want to predict for your retail market, for instance, micro-segmentation becomes very important. And if you have to build those models manually, it's going to take forever. So you need automation, and you need to be able to do more automatic tuning of the best model to select, what are the parameters to set, and so on and so forth. So automation has also become key in this era of artificial intelligence and machine learning and the big data analytics. So given all of that, I would say that right now, we are kind of, all of these things have come together. We have a plethora of data. We have data available from all kinds of sources. The computing power has exploded. There's explosion of the data storage, the ability to build distributed processing, the ability to create analytics that can run on a distributed architecture. All of that requires the huge computing power that we have access to these days. And then, of course, underlying all of the analytics is the research and algorithmic innovation that needs to happen for solving these different kinds of problems. And of course, businesses, the business decisions need to be made more rapidly in a very, very highly connected world. So these are some of the reasons which are pushing this frontier of our education, of our business process development, of our predictive modeling and analytical techniques. It is the new frontier in all of these areas. And we are now, I would say we have been in a golden era for this kind of analytics and this field. So especially for the students who are attending, I would say that you've chosen a great field for your education, because this is really the time to shine. So in order to succeed with analytics and data science, essentially the goal is that there's data around, you want to apply these techniques, and you want to get value from them. There's no use of having all the data if you're not able to get value from them. So there are lots of exciting opportunities in interdisciplinary work, incorporating new data sources, and exploring and inventing new algorithms. So these are some of the points you'll see as themes through my discussion, where I will talk about ways in which you can excel and some of the things you have to keep in mind when you're building an analytics team. It's not enough to just go after just the optimization folks or the data scientists well, data science actually covers a whole bunch of things. So probably that you are covered in many different ways, but predictive modeling, data mining, etc., those are niche disciplines. So you need to be able to bring all of them together and work together. So what are the characteristics of an analytics project? So let me start by defining some of these. First and foremost, when you have a business problem, this is true for anything, not just for an analytics project, you need to have a clear problem definition, and you need to know what is the goal of your project. and you need to be able to have access to and be able to collect, if you don't already have that, the relevant data sources, the relevant data, and sufficient data. If you're building a predictive model, you have to make sure that you have the right data for the models that you're trying to build. The tools. We are actually in a great situation right now where there are lots of software companies as well as open source software that have a plethora of tools that are available to everybody. So you can either get off the shelf tools or you can build them in-house. And depending on which direction you go, the type of people you need to hire will change, or the type of skills you need to develop will change. Then the next stage, of course, after you've decided on the problem and then gathered the data, applied the tools, is the deployment. The best analytic solution is of no good is if it cannot be deployed in practice. So if it just becomes shelfware, it's no good to anybody. So you need to be able to make sure that what you have provided as a solution is acceptable as well as it is practical. And then, of course, you need this continuous loop of being able to do the analysis, deploy, and take a look at it, continuously monitor and see what's happening. So whether you need to modify the models, whether you need to gather more data, etc., etc. So some of these points will be easier to explain if I take a particular example that has some of these characteristics. And the project that I'm going to talk about is a typical offer optimization problem, or in the marketing world, it's known as marketing optimization, where you have lots of customers, and then based to those customers, or even the general population, if you want to acquire more customers, you want to make certain offers, you want to provide certain services, but you don't know whom should you target. Who should be the person that you send an email to? Who is the person that you give a phone call? There are different channels. Who is the person that you send something by mail? So these are all the channels. And then the different types of products. So if you're a bank, for instance, you might have some checking accounts that you want to offer them, some savings, some mortgages, insurance, all of these things. So these are the different products. They can be sent through different channels. And so you're trying to decide what offer to make to which customer in order to get the maximum benefit, so that you either do an cross-sell and upsell an existing customer, or you gather more customers to your bank, to your insurance company, etc., etc. So the marketing optimization problem actually ends up being a huge mixed integer programming problem with thousands and hundreds of thousands of integer variables. And that can be an extremely challenging problem to solve. And no off-the-shelf software can solve that by just dumping the data and putting the model into that. You have to come up with some innovative heuristics to make this. So as a team, we worked on this problem. We worked with several customers to make sure that it worked well, etc., etc. But there are huge challenges that come into play. So you have the tendency, of course, especially if you're an operations research optimization student and you've just learned the best ways of all the different optimization algorithms, your goal is always to look at the optimum. But sometimes you might need to settle on some heuristics that you can use, or near optimum, etc. So these are lessons that we learned as we started developing these algorithms. But the biggest lesson, of course, came when we tried to talk to the potential customers and say, here is a solution that you could put into place. Here is something that you could work with. And we have a wonderful, innovative solution that gets you the near optimum result in a fraction of a time. But the biggest challenge used to be the following. because without an optimization solution where you can optimize the entire project across multiple campaign managers, you end up trying to, so business as usual used to be that each campaign manager got a certain number of campaigns that they were allowed to run. They were told that you have a certain budget and here are the types of channels you can do. And typically each campaign manager went off and did their own campaign in the best possible way, often just doing a straightforward ordering heuristic and then selecting the best customers to reach out to make the offers. Well, now we come in and say, okay, you know, we've got an optimization solution that you can put all these projects together, get an overall budget and an overall goal for your entire bank or your region or whatever the case may be, and then run this. And then based on that, you're able to give the different offers to the different customers, to the different campaign managers. But what would happen in this case is that the campaign managers sometimes, because you're looking at a global optimum, the campaign managers, some of them may not get as many campaigns or as many offers to make as they had when they had their own little world to manage. And that used to become a big problem because the campaign manager said, hey, I like my way of doing things. So this was a big challenge. So we have to come in and explain to them why a global optimum at the end of the day does something good for everyone. But that's not enough. You actually need to have an executive in charge or somebody who's in charge of all of that, who can make some decisions to make sure that the campaign managers have an incentive to participate in this global optimization project. Okay, so these are some of the challenges that we discovered and we came across when we actually went to talk to them. The other thing that, you know, especially if you're an OR person, you would find, the optimization solutions always look like they're a black box. You just put the data in, you get the optimal solution, but then you don't really know why a particular person was selected or somebody was not. So the people who did not have an OR background, the campaign managers, or even some of the other people in the project, they will say, I have no idea why this is good, why this is working. So we need to find ways in which we can show this is how it works in your current system. This is how it works if you use this project, and look at the overall objective function and what has happened. So you always need to be able to do some simulation and show them what if analysis and say, here is what happens with business as usual. Here is what happens with your analytics solution. So these are all some of the things that we learn when we go out and implement these projects in the field. So with that example as a background, so it's easy to see the different roles you need for a successful analytics team. You need the executive support, or the analytics champion is what I would like to call that, for actually defining the scope of the project and also setting the objectives. So probably usually at the highest level of that organization, or somebody who has deputed as having authority for deciding on these things. Then you need the domain experts. So you need the people who actually are running campaigns. So when you go and talk to them, you need to understand what are the important factors for you. What are your challenges? What are the types of offers you make? And what are the types of responses you expect, so that you can put all of that into the model. So you need to actually talk to the people on the ground who are actually running the project and try to understand it before you can build your model to go into your optimization or your predictive and analytics tool. Then, of course, the data experts. This is very, very critical. So you need to have people who know the data that exists, who can gather the data. So if you're building for this particular case, for instance, in the marketing optimization, you need to have predictive models which say, if I make this offer to this demographic of customers, here is the type of response I can get. So to get the response models, you need to have data with those types of customers that you have reached out to and you've run some prior tests, etc. So you need to have predictive modeling experts, you need to have optimization experts to actually run the optimization. Here, if you are taking an off-the-shelf product which we were providing, then you need people who understand the optimization enough so that they can put the right factors and the right objectives into the model. Then you need the campaign managers who are actually running the model to go through. So something that it's always good to realize is the data experts and the analytical experts are people who have to work very closely with each other, because you're constantly saying, hey, you know, I need this kind of a model. Do you have the data for it? Can I run this? Do you know, do you have some other data that I can use? So there's a continuous back and forth. Or when you're building some predictive models and creating new variables, your data sizes might explode. So you need to be able to talk to the data stewards and say, database experts, and say, here is what I'm expecting. Here is what you can expect. Maybe we need more data storage, etc. So these two groups of people need to be constantly in touch with others. So I like to think of the data experts as analytics enablers. The campaign managers are the analytics consumers, because they're taking the results of the predictive model and the optimization and running it. And then the executive support that I mentioned when I described the optimization project, you need to have that executive support, because each individual person involved in the getting the output and having to run the campaigns may not understand why he's got fewer offers than Fred or Mary or somebody else. You need to be able to explain to him or her what the issue is and how this global optimum really helps everybody. So you need that executive support. Again, I would call them an analytics champion. So through all of these layers of people that you need the key requirement is they need to have a good, solid understanding of the value of data-driven modeling and have some basic analytics literacy and the good communication skills, because each one is used to a different language. How do you talk back and forth between them? So the link that I have at the bottom of the screen is a good one on the Inform's website, which actually gives a nice description of an analytics team and all the different ingredients. And some of these terms, the analytics champion, experts, etc. I really like the way they describe them, so I've used those. So analytics innovation, like we did in the marketing optimization or any of the other optimization or predictive modeling problems that we solve, that's not enough. The critical barriers to success are data, the process, acceptability, and talent. And we've covered quite a bit about the data as well as the process that we through, and even the acceptability. Is your result acceptable to the campaign manager? Is it acceptable to the sales force? Is it acceptable to the people who are running your optimization, etc. So, and of course, the talent. You need to have the right talent for the right kind of job. So do you have the right data? So in the predictive modeling case, you need to make sure that you have the definite response models for each of the different types of offers you're going to make for the particular example. So, a simple way to understand the importance of having a broad training data is when you look at facial recognition. So it was interesting. A friend of mine, she's a Caucasian. She was living in China, and she was talking to us. She said that I could probably get away with a bank robbery in China because they won't be able to recognize me, since their training data is restricted mostly to the local population, so they wouldn't be able to recognize me. So because their training data was not broad enough to include all the different types of people. So again, it's a TED talk by this data scientist named Joy. She has a wonderful, she's Ghanaian African, and she's of course black in color, but she found that she was actually working with facial recognition, all of that stuff. She found that some of the tools that she was using even recognize her as a person. And that was because, again, the training data was bad. So she has built a lot of work. She has done a lot of work in how to fight the bias in the algorithms, and the importance of training data comes through very clearly in this. Do you have the right process? We talked about that in the case of the marketing optimization problem, and how important it is to have the executive support for the procedural changes. And also, when you're actually deploying your solution, you need to make sure that you have thought through, is the solution easy to implement? Do people understand what it means, how it goes, how it should be done? You have acceptable results. Again, similar to the MO problem that we talked about, do people understand why this offer was being made, or why this particular person was rejected for a loan approval, and whereas somebody else was not? And so interpretability has become a very, very key factor in many of the data science algorithms that we build. You need to be able to make sure that the data scientist understands it, the consumers and users understand it, and the policymakers and the regulators understand it. So if you're trying to make some policy changes, then you need to make sure that what models you built and whatever decisions you're going to make based on those models make sense, and are they fair, are they transparent, are they acceptable to everyone? So interpretability is something to keep in mind. So something as simple as in a predictive model, people have always liked decision trees better than some of the black box models like neural networks and gradient boosting and some of these more fancy models. And that's because a decision tree is easier to understand than some of these other models. So how do you make sure that the complex models, if they are providing better results, how do you make sure that people understand that? So in order for you to have access and to be able to understand all this, you need to make sure that the people you hire have the right kind of training and the right kind of experience. So how do you succeed in this world as students, young professionals, as leaders of data science, and as members of academic and research organizations? So I'll discuss each of these points in the next few slides. So as a student, when you're transitioning to the real world, you have to make sure that you understand the business domain. What is to be solved? So you need to make sure that if you're going to go into a retail organization, you need to understand all the different aspects of retail. How do they do things? One of a very a person that I very, very much admire, the operations research field, Pooja Dewan. She worked for BNSF, a railroad, and she said the first few months she actually spent time on the trains, running through their tracks and trying to figure out how the trains worked. Likewise, at UPS, everybody who joins has to actually be on a truck and delivering the packages in order to understand the challenges. So you need to understand the business domain. What is the problem to be solved? Make sure you understand that first. You need to have the right analytical domain expertise. So again, the type of expertise depends on whether you want to build the algorithms or you want to use algorithms and models and software that somebody else has built. In both these cases, you need to have a different set of skills, a different kind of training. So typically for a research level expertise, you probably would need a PhD or sufficient experience after an advanced degree. For a modeler, a master's in any one of these fields, or specifically in the business analytics and a data science program, gives you a lot of experience in actually working with this. Communication skill. It's very, very important to make sure that you understand, talk to each other, because everybody may not understand your language. You might be using one type of something to mean a specific model, whereas somebody else in computer science might call it something different. So you need to make sure that there's a common understanding. The people who are working with data need to understand what you mean when you're saying a predictive model, when you say a response model, and then so on and so forth. And the teamwork. work. That's extremely important. And I think that's one thing that probably is very different from someone who goes into academia to somebody who works in practice or industry. Because in academia, you know, unless you're involved in consulting as well, you typically can work on your own, except work with a few of the other researchers and faculty members who are in your area. But if you are in industry and you're thrown in the middle of a project, you need to work with people from all different backgrounds, all different skill sets, and be able to understand how to work with them. So these are very important that you have to keep in mind. Understanding the big picture. And, you know, I've said this in different ways, but when we talk about the big picture, I like to think about this old fable from India about the six blind men and the elephant, where each person goes and stands in front, blind person stands next to the elephant and says, oh, this looks like a snake. He's touching the tail of the elephant. This looks like a big tree trunk. He's touching the foot of the elephant. So he has different ideas of what is in front of him because he's not able to see the whole. But somebody who's able to step back and look at the whole elephant can say, ah, this is an elephant. You're actually looking at the tail. You're actually looking at the trunk, and so on and so forth. So understanding the big picture is very, very critical. It also makes it easier for you to understand somebody else's point. So quite often it might be that you're stuck in your idea, in your point of view, but when you talk with others and see their point of view, maybe you might even change your mind. You might even, or combine together, you might come up with a better solution. The second thing that you need to understand is show incremental progress. Nowadays, in a lot we talk about agile methodology, agile development. Well, it's basically being able to say, instead of saying, okay, give me the project and I'll come back in 6 months and here is the result, you actually show incremental project as you go along. And every time you succeed at something, it actually helps you gain confidence, gain the trust of your customer, and go forth. And showing improvement of a business as usual is usually a very, very good first step. And remember that perfect is the enemy of good enough. I like this quote quite a bit, because the perfect solution may sometimes be hard to implement, and you might be chasing the finest level of optimality, but then you've lost a lot of time in the process. So you've actually lost time before you could actually put your result into production or implementation. So that's very, very critical. So succeeding as analytic leaders, we've covered each one of these as I discussed the particular project. So the different roles, if you're building a team, you need to have a business leader, of course. You need to have the analytics expert, whether they are, if they're in research and to invent the new algorithms, if you don't want to buy off the shelf software. You need to have an analytics modeler who knows how to the analytical tools. These days, many of products that are coming out are excellent in terms of helping you create automated models very well. But you need to understand the result of the model and be able to explain it to the person who's actually going to implement it. So you need that level of understanding. You need database engineers and IT experts for storing and updating the data. And then, of course, the implementation experts for deploying the analytics results. But through all of these layers, a basic level of analytics literacy is required for every role. And that is a key that I believe. So the basic, so I think I was on this slide, right, when I started having the problems. So the roles in a data and analytics organization, I was just pointing out that there is a paper that I wrote at the beginning of this year for building analytics team for success in the Applied Marketing Analytics Journal, which covers some of these topics.
Excuse me, Radhika.
Yeah.
Your slide is not showing.
It's not showing?
No.
Okay, let me see. Yeah. Is it there now?
Yes, it is.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, okay. Yeah. with regard to education, what I was saying is that I'm a big fan of the analytics programs because they cover a broad range of topics and actually train the students in being able to run projects and work on projects, etc. But overall, I believe that there is a real need across all universities, especially in the engineering domain, to include something at a core curriculum level to increase the basic awareness of analytics for everybody. Then, of course, the analytical expertise for PhD programs, etc. We have a huge number of them, of course. So in each one of, but even there, a course on data-driven decision-making is important so that they actually work with project and know about the business applications across all industries. And something else that one has to emphasize is the importance of interdisciplinary collaboration. And it's an exciting time. There are lots of new applications for existing techniques and new areas of research. And I believe that we can do a lot by learning to work with new safe sources, new types of data, exploiting the new infrastructure for large data, new algorithms, and educating and training your workforce. So essentially, we want to go from data to value using the automated data-driven decision-making. So with that, there's my email address. So please feel free to drop me an email if you need to get in touch with me and have any follow-on questions.